you know the rest of the story.
All right, welcome back to the rest of the story. As you can see, we got Andrew here. Andrew, what was on this hideous Ford that was just behind us?
Hideous. Hey, got it here.
Yeah.
We brought the 4 boxes of beans out on this today. We got 2 boxes of 2.6 bean and 2 boxes of a 2.5 bean.
Okay. And then as far as all the corn goes, we got most of that delivered last night. What's the advantage of having our seed delivered as early as we do? And it is like 3 days from April 1st or like that, so.
I don't think it's that early, but you know,
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
yeah. No, it gets it, out of our warehouse, and it's here on the farm, and we haven't had any cuts this year for seed, which is really nice. A lot of times as they finish packaging seed up, there might be issues with germination of one number or another, or there just might be shortages, a lot of demand for the seed, and I think there's still a lot of demand, but seed production was good last year. The beans that I brought out to you had a 90% germ rate, and I've heard some stories that there are a lot of beans out there that are lower germ this year because of growing conditions, so happy to get you some 90% germ beans. And
well, speaking of beans, in light of the current market situation, are you seeing a lot of soybeans out in the area?
A decent amount, yeah. I think there's going to be fewer bean acres this year than what we had last year. But
for anybody that's asking, we actually do have 3 boxes less of beans than we did last year ourselves. But as far as the corn, though, getting back to that, especially as far as delivering the corn earlier, the reason we do that is because we've had just exactly that problem a year or two ago, where we had an entire number of corn that we didn't get delivered like 2 weeks before we were ready to start planting. So it was a last minute panic trying to get the seed around. Now, as far as everybody can tell, it is kind of starting to look a lot nicer out here. And you just said this morning that at Crop Max, he's no longer at United Co-op. You guys are already starting to get your fertilizer spreaders ready to run.
Yep. No, we this morning we started about 5:30 getting one of the spreaders out, and we're calibrating them right now, doing the pan test, and making sure that we get a consistent spread pattern. When I started working with you guys, one of the first things that I noticed was that we had some striping on the field, and so that's one thing that we want to prevent. Different fertilizer densities can spread differently, and so it's not like you can just throw a bunch of fertilizer in a spreader and go out and spread it.
Hope for the best.
And hope for the best. And there's still a lot of guys that run their own buggies, behind the tractor, and we don't do anything to go out and calibrate those. So you get what you get when you run a buggy. A lot of times, I can put the drone up in the air and see the striping in the field, and anytime you can see the visual symptoms on a corn plant, you're losing yield. So we're out calibrating equipment today and getting started spreading and making sure that everything's set up right, because once the conditions are really fit, it's going to be go time.
Now, as far as conditions go and spreading fertilizer, how early is too early?
It's a good question. That's a loaded question. Yeah, last year we were talking about it a little bit. We had the opportunity to get 2 airflows out here, and we got it all spread in a day. It worked out really nice.
And we didn't. That took a little bit of convincing, because we've never spread fertilizer that early.
Yeah, we were in March last year when we started spreading. The only thing to really keep in mind is you don't want runoff. So if the ground is completely frozen, I tend to stay away from spreading that, because you want the next rainfall that comes to help work some of that fertilizer into the ground. Some of the types of fertilizer, like your phosphorus and potassium, they don't translocate through the soil well. So they basically stay on top. You want to watch out for any spring erosion that could take some of those particles away. Nitrogen, the moment you start putting nitrogen out on the ground, then you're subjecting it to denitrification and leaching. We were talking about this just a little bit ago, how nitrogen management's a big thing with crop production anymore. Making sure that nitrogen's available to the corn plant when it needs it. And so that when you talk about spreading early, I'm a little bit cautious with nitrogen, but there's different stabilizers and different ways to protect it too, so that you can get out there and get it early.
And this year it seems how we're getting away from anhydrous, not because we want to, because it's kind of price prohibitive. We were talking about split applying nitrogen and the advantages of going from planting, or putting a little bit down at planting and then a little bit more later on in the season. What are the advantages of that, doing that how we're planning on doing it this year, as opposed to putting it all up front with anhydrous, or in the fall with anhydrous.
Yeah. No, there's a couple different aspects with that. The main thing is, corn's going to take up 60% of its nitrogen when it's about shoulder high and taller. So if we come through there at waist to shoulder high corn, we're putting the nitrogen down. You get 100, or you get that full dose of nitrogen. It's not subject to the spring rains and leaching into nitrification. And I've been doing it with some customers for the past few years. It's been working really well. We've been getting very good yields by going that route. You can get a little bit of burn sometimes on the tops of the plants after you put it on.
I did it last year. That was the first year I top dressed, and I had some local guys asking me what I did to my corn and how I burned it, because it was looking pretty sad there for a little bit, but it pulled out of it. And not to say anything negative about anhydrous, because anhydrous does work, I really do believe that.
Yep.
But the ground that I top dressed last year and I split applied my nitrogen that didn't have any anhydrous, that did perform about 30 bushels better than my anhydrous ground.
Yep.
But that's also split applying, and depends a lot on the weather. That's something he likes to throw around a lot. But.
Yeah. Well, and we use the exact same amount of nitrogen on the anhydrous ground and then on the split up application. And even though we put N-Serve with the anhydrous to help protect it, the N-Serve typically lasts about 10 weeks. So it just makes you wonder a little bit how much of that actually leached out and what's available to those plants when it needs it. So I'm not afraid at all at top dressing urea, over the top. I love the wide drops. The benefit of spinning urea on over the top versus running UAN through the wide drop on a lot of fields, it's if you don't have those straight long rows, it's really hard to do a nice job with the wide drops.
Yep, that is why you don't see us running wide drops too much across a lot of our ground.
Yeah. Wide drops work best on level ground, on big fields. They do work on other ground too, but it's you got to be careful that you don't run down corn, and that when I've run the wide drops, there's been times I've left corners just because I don't want to drive into it, and last year on some of those corners we saw 40 bushel yield difference. Whereas a spinner spreader, you just kind of back up to that corner, turn it on and let it go, and you run down a little bit less. So you're a little bit more efficient with the wide drops, I would say. And I like the placement of it. It's really the most ideal way to get nitrogen down to the roots of the plant, but it's ideal, but it's not always practical.
Yep. Which is also why we do the 6-row cultivator and set up that way. It works great, but depends on where you're at in the country. Now, as far as talking about nitrogen, we're talking about the cost savings of putting it right down next to the plant as opposed to broadcasting it, because I did bring up using a coulter machine, putting it right in the middle of the row. We were down in Louisville and we saw exactly that, the actual mass of the roots that the corn plant has, and putting a stripe of nitrogen right down the center between 2 rows, you're really a fair ways away from the root, and you're hoping for a little bit of that being able to actually get to the roots.
Yeah.
As opposed to the nitrogen going straight down in the soil and missing your plant altogether. So how much money you actually potentially lose that doesn't even get to your plant, that you're really just hoping that gets to your crop.
Yeah. So we should actually dig some roots this year. I've always wanted to, but it's a matter of time, and if I'm wide dropping and being out in the field, it's tough to get everything done I want to do. But you can take a 5-gallon bucket of water, dig around a root plant, and then dunk it in that water to wash off all the dirt from around the roots and see what kind of root mass you have around that plant. And typically you'll find it's about 7 inches away from where that seed was planted. So on 30-inch rows, you got around 15 inches or so right down the middle that those roots aren't really taking anything out of the soil in those areas. So you see a lot of different strip till rigs going around that are trying to keep fertilizer just banded right in the root zone. There's pros and cons to that. There's really no one perfect method of putting fertilizer down. There's a lot of pros and cons to any method out there, and I like strip tilling, but I also like building fertility. And a lot of times you see that you don't build overall fertility with the strip till because you're just managing a zone. Versus when we go out and grid sample and watch what our soil levels are at, and really start managing our P and K through variable rate technology that's out there, then it really doesn't matter where that strip is, or where you run that planter across, because you're going to have consistent fertility all the way across. Even the best strip tilling with RTK and you name it, you're still going to have times where that corn plant's not exactly planted in that strip, and you can see that in season 2 when you're looking. So technology is great
when it works.
When it works.
Say, what kind of technology, since you've shown up, could you give everybody, a lot of our newer viewers, a lot of the technology that has suddenly shown up to our operation and the few short years you've actually been around?
Sure.
Going from basically the bare basics that we had to what we have now.
Yeah. Well, I already mentioned those stripes that you had in the field from the fertilizer misapplication. So when I started working with you guys and talking to you, well, the first thing we talked about was a yield monitor. We wanted to see what the yield difference was where you had the fertilizer and where you didn't have the fertilizer. And it was a substantial enough yield difference that paid for the yield monitor right there that year. So that was the first thing you guys did, and because you had that monitor on the tractor already, we could use that, or in the combine already, you could use that in the tractor for planting. And so we upgraded your planting monitor, and you're able to see a lot better what was going on as you were planting with your singulation, your population. I don't know, you found the screen pretty easy to use?
Ag Leader has actually been really user-friendly as far as figuring out what to use. I like John Deere, but don't get me wrong, but that first year we had that planter, that was an 1800 monitor, that came with that corn planter, and that was a pain to navigate, especially buying it in season and actually being able to jump in it and run. It was a little bit of a challenge, actually figuring it out and knowing that it's running properly, especially when you're doing something as important as planting.
Yep.
But especially when you're talking about the harvest monitor. I mean, we really saved ourselves that year, especially with the striping, because on the field that we had, that Andrew was talking about, the striping in particular, we actually went back to that field, harvested it for a little bit, and then quit. I think it was 3 different times, because we were convinced that the yield monitor was acting up, because we were seeing, stupid high yield difference. I mean, we were seeing 200 bushel in one pass and like 140 in the next.
Yeah.
I mean, that is huge, and that's kind of hard to believe, even looking at the monitor, and then come to find out the monitor was working just fine. It was the fertilizer application that was done back in April that year. So yield monitors, I've been telling my friend, my local guys here that have asked me about it, that are on the fence about doing a yield monitor, it's going to be the same for them as it was for us. Once you go through and actually harvest your first season with the yield monitor, you'll never look at your field the same way again, especially when it comes to spreading manure and everything else and where you're going to be doing tillage. You double think yourself, or think about it more in your head as far as what you're actually going to be doing and why you're doing it, and if it's even worth doing, especially like when you compare high yielding and low yielding parts of the field.
Yep.
So.
And it brings up to mind the one farm that you're running, Travis, where house was built and there's a bunch of soil that got moved. Mm-hmm. We could see that right on the yield monitor, the differences, and then we knew where to go out and soil test too. We wanted to see, what's our phosphorus, what's our potassium level, and you've even been running that differently in different parts, because you know that the yield opportunity there is a little different than in other parts of the field. Yep. So we can start pushing yield and feeding the plants where we know that we can get the yield, and where we know that we might be yield limited by soil or drainage, and hey, we back off on the inputs and make it a lot more profitable for you to run that.
All right, one last thing before we go. As far as the seed, what different seed are we actually seeing this year compared to last year? Because our operation, our grandpa planted Pioneer seed for 50 years. What are we actually seeing this year? Because since you've showed up, it seems like we're kind of bounced around between different brands, but I want to point out that it's not so much sticking to one particular brand, it's the varieties and how they perform in the area and looking at different test results. Yep. So can you explain that a little bit?
Well, obviously there's lots of seed companies out there, and I would say most of the seed companies have some really good products in their lineup. It's just a matter of placing them right, knowing what kind of roots these plants have, knowing how they perform on lower yielding soils or higher fertility soils. We've got different varieties picked out on this farm than some of the other farms, because we know what we're working with, and thanks to technology and yield maps, we can start placing hybrids a little better. Yeah, you're planting some decal this year, planting some dairyland this year, and planting the Asgrow beans. We've got offensive and defensive hybrids of each. We've got a good variety of products to help manage your risk. We don't want to put all racehorses out there and then have a stressful year where racehorses might fall apart. So we've got some racehorse type hybrids on the higher performing ground that we know consistently does well. And then we've got some of the workhorse type hybrids that can really perform under stress, under drought conditions and different things. Good against tar spot, disease. That's a big thing that we've been talking about lately. So yeah, I'm really excited about the lineup, and you got a diverse group of products. Still the Monsanto traits that you've been used to dealing with when we worked with AgriGold. AgriGold's got they're really high performing products. A lot of the racehorse type products. Decal is very similar, so I matched up a lot of decal hybrids with the similar AgriGold hybrids we've been working with, and I think you'll see the same experience. And obviously, you guys have planted decal in the past too, so you're familiar with their products. So I'm excited about it. You got a good group of good lineup of products, and throughout the year we can talk a little bit about the differences in each number that you have.
So later on here we'll talk about tissue samples and more like that, more stuff we do throughout the summer.
Yeah, so. And digging roots. We should do that this year and take a look at how the roots even vary on some of these numbers.
Yeah, because it's not every plant is created the same. That's very true.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the little bit of interview we had with Andrew. That's a little clip of the last hour-long conversation we just had. So thanks for letting us interview you and everything, because a lot of viewers don't really understand or really know what all goes into the process of raising a crop. It's not just putting a plant in the ground and hoping for the best.
Honestly, I'm an agronomist by heart. I love growing plants. I don't know if you saw that picture. I put a picture on Facebook here a while back, but I was about this tall, and my grandmother let me choose what to put in her flower bed, and I planted a bunch of corn right behind her house. Hey, at least it was south facing, so it got all the sun, but man, I was proud. I was like 4 or 5 years old. Look at my flowers I got here. It's all corn plants. So I love growing corn. The technology thing kind of just came as part of that because I wanted to see how the stuff's doing. And then you got to have fertilizer, and the whole sales aspect is kind of the nature of what you got to do as an agronomist, but the real highlight of it comes from seeing products perform, and again, it's all about being profitable at the end of the year. So keeping happy customers is the main thing.
Yep. As I say, I've told you time and time again, we'll drop you at the first
I know.
All right. Well, thanks guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Take care. Take it easy. Keep in touch. We'll talk to you tomorrow.